All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're kind of picking up, where we left off in a
Right.
way. We've been talking a lot about the whole drug development
Yeah.
process, and we've gone through all these phases, and it feels like we're nearing the end of this huge story. We're talking about what happens right after, hopefully,
Right.
successful phase 3 clinical trials,
Yeah.
and that is the what's called the NDA or new drug application. That's what it is for your, more the traditional small molecule drugs.
Yeah.
But for the, those complex biologic therapies, those bigger molecules,
Yeah.
it's called the BLA,
Right.
Biologic License Application.
Yes.
So, you followed along with us on this whole journey. Maybe in some previous deep dives, we've talked about, years of just discovery,
Right.
then preclinical studies, and then, of course, we talked about those large-scale phase 3 trials.
Yeah.
So the question is, what happens after all that intense work?
Yeah. What's next? Yeah.
What happens, so this NDA or BLA submission, right? This is that like formal request to the FDA.
Right.
It's the final hurdle
Mhm.
before a drug can actually become available
Oh,
to
yeah.
patients.
For sure.
So, you might be thinking, and we're thinking too, like, how do you even begin
Right.
to take all that
Mm.
data that's been generated over years, right?
Hmm.
Of all this research,
That was like a mountain of data.
it's got to be a crazy amount of data and turn it into something
Yeah.
that regulatory agencies like the FDA can actually use
Yeah.
and review and go through. So that's our mission today. Like, how do they even compile all this information?
Right.
And what are those key components? And what strategies do these drug companies employ?
Right.
What makes for a successful submission?
Right.
So we're going to unpack all of that today. And we've got, a lot of different expert guides
Okay.
that we're drawing from on drug development and the regulatory world.
Right. Well, I think it's important to just emphasize just how important this is, this submission. I mean, you talked about it. It's that formal request for market authorization.
Right.
But it's also the culmination of everything that's happened before. I mean,
Well.
starting with preclinical, you've got your pharmacology.
Right.
So that's like, how it works in the body, how it interacts with the body. Toxicology, is it even safe?
Right.
I mean, can you even give it to people? And then, just even the drug formulation. Like,
Yeah.
how do you even get the molecule into the body? So all of that's kind of laid out in this application.
Right. All that foundational work. That's right. And then, of course, then you have the whole development of the manufacturing process.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to reliably and safely produce this this drug or this biologic
Right.
on a
Yeah.
commercial scale?
Right.
Right. You got to be able to make a lot of it,
Right.
And then, yeah, the clinical trials. I mean, those are huge,
Uh-huh.
especially those phase 3 trials.
Right.
Those pivotal trials where you're actually putting this drug or biologic to the test in real people.
Right. With, hundreds or thousands of patients.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Large patient populations. And, you got to demonstrate, uh, beyond a reasonable doubt
Yeah.
that it's safe and that it actually works for what you say it's going to do.
Right.
It actually does what it's supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole package is designed to prove that, essentially.
Yeah. So it's safe, it's efficacious, it works, and it works for the condition it's designed to treat. That's the key.
So you've got this, it sounds like this huge collection of data.
Yeah.
So how does it actually get sent to the FDA or these other regulatory agencies? I mean, it's not like they're, like reeling in carts of paper anymore.
No, definitely not. It's all digital now, which is nice. It's called the Electronic Common Technical Document.
Right.
You'll see that as ECTD a lot, and that's the global standard.
So that's ECTD. Got it.
Yeah, so it's essentially standardized now. All the data is in the same format,
That makes sense.
which is good
Yeah, I can imagine.
because it makes it much easier
Yeah.
for reviewers to kind of find the information you're looking for.
Right. When you have that much data,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
needs to be organized.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like this ECTD format, it's built around different modules.
It is.
So what are those?
So the ECTD is based on guidelines from the International Council for Harmonization, or ICH.
Okay.
So it's kind of a global effort to kind of standardize all this, the
Yeah.
technical requirements for registration of a drug.
Got it. So it's a global standard.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is how you submit a drug
Yep.
in the U.S., in Europe,
Pretty much anywhere, yeah.
everywhere.
And it's divided into 5 modules.
5 modules. Okay. So let's go through them one by one
Yeah, let's do it.
and talk about what each module contains. So module 1, what is that all about?
Module 1 is really the administrative stuff.
Yeah.
This is where you're going to have all your application forms, your cover letter, table of contents. And then importantly, it also has all the details about the proposed labeling. like the package insert
Right.
that doctors and patients will see. So it's really kind of the introductory information.
Right, it's all the paperwork, essentially,
Exactly.
like the cover letter. What about Module 2?
So module 2 is going to be your summaries.
Okay.
So this is kind of like, the high-level summary of the whole submission. They don't have to dig into the data yet.
Right, so it's the overview.
It's the overview.
Yeah.
So you've got like an overall summary of, the drug, the program, the key conclusions.
Right.
Then you'll have, the clinical summary specifically about, the clinical trials.
Right.
Non-clinical summary, which is all your preclinical data. And then a quality overall summary, which talks about, the manufacturing and the controls.
So it's like the executive summary.
Yeah,
Is it
exactly.
for the FDA.
Exactly.
Okay. So modules 1 and 2, that's kind of setting the stage.
Yeah,
And then module 3, we're getting into, I imagine, more of the details.
we are. Yeah. So module 3 is all about quality.
Okay.
And it's often referred to as CMC, chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. And so this is where you get into the nitty-gritty of the drug substance,
Okay.
which is, the active ingredient, how it's made, how the drug product, so that's like the final formulation,
Right.
is manufactured and controlled to make sure that it's, consistent and pure.
Right, right.
And the regulators look at this really carefully because manufacturing issues are actually a major cause of delays.
Oh, interesting.
And rejections.
Yeah, yeah. So they want to make sure that you can make it, and you can make it reliably.
Exactly. Not just like a small batch, but you can scale it up.
Right, right.
So for the drug substance, you're talking about the structure of the molecule, all its physiochemical properties. So like, is it soluble? Is it stable?
Right, right.
The manufacturing process, all the tests you do to check its purity and how strong it is, specifications, and then stability data. So
Yeah.
all that's in there.
Wow, it's very detailed.
It is very detailed. And then for the drug product itself, it's the same thing. So the composition of the drug product, so like every ingredient, even the inactive ingredients, the manufacturing process for that,
Right.
all the tests you do on the product specifications, and then the container closure, like what you put it in, and then also stability data for
Yeah.
the actual product. And the sources that we've looked at really emphasize the importance of process safety and GMP, good manufacturing practice.
Yeah.
So it's really, a well-defined manufacturing process,
Wow.
and one that's controlled is critical.
Okay. So module 3 is like, that's like the, the recipe and the quality control manual for the drug?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And then we move on to module 4, which I imagine is more about, okay, what does it do in a living system?
Yeah, exactly. So that's your non-clinical study report. So this is all your preclinical data. So every study that you did before going into humans. And this is where you're going to have both your pharmacology and your toxicology.
Right, right. So you're talking about like how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
And then also all the studies that are looking at, how safe it is.
Exactly. Exactly. So pharmacology studies, you're talking about the mechanism of action. So like, how does it actually work biologically?
At a cellular level, right?
At a cellular level, yeah. Pharmacokinetics. So that's like, what the body does to the drug, how it's absorbed.
Right, right. Like where does it go in the body and how's it broken down?
Exactly.
yeah.
How do you get rid of it? So all of that. And then toxicology is going to be, acute toxicity. So that's like a single dose.
Right.
What happens? Subchronic, chronic toxicity. So repeated doses over time.
Okay.
Carcinogenicity. Does it cause cancer? Genotoxicity. Does it damage your DNA? Reproductive toxicity. So a lot of safety data
Right.
goes into this module. And also, one thing I should mention is GLP, good laboratory practice.
Right, right. I've heard of GLP, yeah.
So that's regulations that basically ensure the quality of the data that you're generating for these non-clinical studies. And the reason that that's so important is because, that helps you justify the starting dose you use in humans.
Okay, yeah.
And then also any kind of safety monitoring you need to do during the trials.
Right, yeah.
So it all comes from this preclinical work.
So you got to understand, at least to some degree, what's
Yeah.
happening in animals before you go into people.
For sure. You got to lay that groundwork.
And then the big one, I'm guessing, is module 5.
Yeah, module 5, this is the clinical study reports.
Okay.
So this is often the largest and most important module of the whole submission.
Okay.
And it's got all the data from your clinical trials. So phase 1, phase 2,
Right.
and most importantly, your phase 3 trials.
Right. Where you're actually proving that the drug does what it's supposed to do in people.
Exactly, exactly. So it's all about proving efficacy and safety in the intended patient population.
Okay.
And, our sources talk a lot about the importance of randomized controlled trials,
Right.
often blinded, often placebo-controlled. So it's really, you're trying to get good, solid data here
Right.
to prove that the drug works and that it's safe.
And what kind of information do you actually include in these clinical study reports?
Oh, there's tons in there. So you're going to have your protocol. So that's like how you designed and ran the study.
Right.
Your statistical analysis plan.
Okay.
So how you're going to analyze the data.
Yeah.
Your data listings. So that's just, basically all the data you collected.
Wow.
Summaries of the individual patient data. And then, for phase 3 trials, the primary endpoint is really important because that's the main outcome the trial was designed to measure. So you really want to make sure that that shows a benefit.
Yeah, that's the thing that you're measuring to prove that the drug works.
Exactly.
Okay, so now you have all this data. It's all nicely organized into this ECTD format. What happens next? I mean, what are the timelines like?
Well, putting together an NDA or BLA, it's a huge job.
Yeah.
And it can take a long time, even after the phase 3 trials are done.
Okay.
So you got to make sure everything's complete, accurate, it's all in the right format.
I bet.
So there's a lot of, very careful attention to detail required at this stage.
Yeah, it makes sense. It sounds like, though, that you don't have to wait till every single thing is done.
You don't. No, and actually for certain drugs that get special designations like fast track.
Yeah.
The FDA might actually let you do what's called a rolling review.
Right.
So as sections are done, you can just submit them.
Okay. So you could just submit it piecemeal.
Exactly, yeah. So that can really speed things up because the FDA can start looking at it.
Right. They can get started earlier.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense. And are there any other kind of, proactive things that companies do to kind of, make sure this goes smoothly?
Oh, yeah. They'll often have meetings with the regulatory agencies. So, for example, you might have like a pre-NDA or pre-BLA meeting where you're talking to the FDA and you're kind of going over your plan and answering any questions they might have. So, you're making sure everyone's on the same page.
Right. You're trying to get ahead of anything. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. And so it's not just about having all the data. It's also about understanding the guidelines.
Absolutely. Yeah. You got to know the rules.
Right.
So things like ICH guidelines, we talked about E6, good clinical practice, E9, statistical principles.
Right.
You got to make sure your submission meets all those. If you don't, it can cause delays or even rejections.
Right.
So it's really important to know, what the rules are.
So even if you have a good drug, you have positive phase 3 trials.
Right.
It still sounds like this whole process can be really complicated.
Yeah, it's definitely not always straightforward.
Are there any, common pitfalls?
Yeah.
Or challenges that companies need to be aware of?
Yeah, so even if your data looks good, you might have some safety signals that pop up that you didn't see during the trials.
Right.
And the FDA is going to look at that really carefully. They're going to want to make sure that the efficacy you showed actually translates to a benefit for patients.
Right.
And then, of course, CMC, the manufacturing, is super important. They want to make sure that you can actually make the drug consistently and to a high standard.
So that Module 3 is really important.
Module 3, yeah, super important. And then, sometimes, the FDA might come back and say, hey, we have some questions. We need some more information.
Right. Can you do another study?
Or, can you analyze your data this way?
Right.
So there's, often back and forth. It's not just like you submit it and then you're done.
Right. So you have to be prepared.
You got to be prepared, yeah.
To answer questions and maybe even do more work.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So it sounds like this NDA BLA submission process.
Yeah.
It's incredibly rigorous.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's challenging.
You're basically taking all this research.
Yeah.
And you're turning it into this formal request to be able to market this drug.
Yeah. And each module really tells a part of that story.
Yeah.
It's all about demonstrating the drug's safety and how well it works and convincing the regulators that it's worth approving.
Right. Yeah. And I think for our listeners, those of you who are following along, this whole process is it gives you a sense of just what goes into getting a drug approved.
It's a long run.
And to market.
For sure.
And how a new medicine actually, comes to be.
It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. You start from scratch, you have an idea.
Right.
You go through all these phases, you collect all this data, and then finally, you submit this huge document.
Yeah.
And hopefully it gets approved and it can help people.
Right. It's a huge endeavor.
It is. It's a huge endeavor.
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive into, this critical part of drug development.
Right.
And hopefully this has made you a little bit more curious about, maybe some of the ICH guidelines or, different regulatory pathways in different parts of the world.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, there's always more to learn. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.